It's lovely to be here today. I'm thrilled to be following such a wonderful presentation this morning about digital archiving, and we'll be coming at the aspects of the digital and the humanities from a slightly different perspective, talking mainly about digital mapping. My name is Ana Stevenson, and I'm here with my colleague Claire Brennan. And our case study that we'll be exploring today is about the time-layered cultural maps infrastructure. We would like to begin, though, with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional lands of the custodians of the lands on which we live, work and study, in particular the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people whose lands we're gathered on today, the Jarawar and Jarawar people of the Toowoomba region, whose lands I did most of this work on, and also the Wulgarukaba and Bindal people of North Queensland, who Claire did much of this work on. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and we acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Before we get started, we'd also just like to give a little bit of content advice about the topics that we'll be covering today. This presentation does engage with the history of colonialism on this continent, so-called Australia, and as settler historians, we acknowledge the pain and trauma that this history can bring to many Indigenous peoples. But we also feel that we have a responsibility as settler historians to engage with this content, to engage with it critically and in a nuanced fashion. And this is kind of where we come to our digital mapping project from this perspective. We will say also that a lot of the data that we're dealing with is European in provenance. Claire will talk about this in more detail, but we look at data that's from European scientific expeditions, also from the Monument Australia website, and it does tend to have a European provenance. Because the presentation today, is mainly focused on a digital infrastructure, a lot of our discussion will be quite kind of process-driven, but we do talk about the data in some greater depth, and we do tend to draw on examples relating to the history of colonisation and Captain James Cook, and particularly his voyages. So that's kind of where we're coming at things from today. Our presentation today will begin with a brief background about the time-layered cultural maps infrastructure, just to give a bit of a detail about where it originated. And then we'll go into more depth into 3 case studies. We'll start by talking about the Coral Discovery Project, which is Claire's major project based at James Cook University. We'll then talk about the Mapping Monuments case study, which is a project based at the University of Southern Queensland. And then we'll take a bit of a turn away from time-layered cultural maps and give some insight into another digital mapping tool that could be kind of equally useful for your needs, and a small case study of where we've used this alternative digital mapping tool. So the team, hand over to you.
I'm Claire Brennan, and I'm based at the inappropriately named James Cook University in Townsville. I have an interest in these voyages of exploration that is part of our first project, and they are fascinating in terms of being time capsules of observations. If you put the right lens on, you can almost see what it was like at the time that these people touched in places. And I might mention too that the Coral Discovery Project is so called because it was triggered by conversations with coral taxonomists. And I'll mention now too, sorry Anna, that you're welcome to ask questions at any time during the presentation, because we're going to be doing some things with the computer. They may go awry. I might be relieved to have something else to talk about while I try and make it work.
That's right. Please do feel free to ask questions. We would like this to be a workshop kind of discussion kind of situation. My name's Ana Stevenson. I'm currently working in research and advocacy with Anglicare, and I would like to thank my employer for letting me be here today, but I also am affiliated with the University of Southern Queensland. And I would also like to note that we've been working with Caitlin Mills, who is a Masters of Research candidate at the University of Southern Queensland, who I've had the pleasure of supervising and also the pleasure of working with as a research assistant on this project. So we really thank and acknowledge Caitlin's major contributions to this work. So let's move on to speak a little bit about time-layered cultural maps. Time-layered cultural maps are something that's probably quite familiar to people today. Can I have a show of hands as to who's heard of this digital infrastructure? Great, fantastic. So we're kind of working from a shared knowledge of what we're talking about. Time-layered cultural maps originated from an ARC linkage infrastructure equipment and facilities grant with the aims of kind of making a digital tool that was really applicable for use amongst humanists. Kind of broadly conceived, historians, linguists, Indigenous studies, other disciplines in the humanities, to kind of give an accessible digital tool that helps kind of take humanities data that step further and kind of gives digital mapping capabilities. And it has also gained support from the Australian Research Data Commons to kind of to flesh out this infrastructure. The origins of the project were cross-institutional, and Claire's been working with the time-layered cultural map on the Coral Discovery project for probably since near the inception of the digital tool. Would that be correct?
I'm not quite sure when it was conceived, but Coral Discovery is a few years old now, so perhaps.
Yeah, an early uptake. So yeah, we'll move on to the discussion of the Coral Discovery project.
Oh, okay. So this project, as I say, sprang out of conversations with coral taxonomists, and I want to take us now to the actual live website, so let's hope this works. And that's one of the points I wanted to make. I had to make a website to present the TLC maps that I've produced with this project. TLC is very much a back end. It's not a shop front. And so if you're embarking on a TLC project, you do need to, if you're embarking on a TLC project, you do need to consider what your shop front is going to be. I had to consider, and I've got three things in play with this project. There are the TLC maps run through the TLC site. There are the data sets which I store using the JCU system for storing research data. And then there's a website where you can access everything. And I've started arranging things on here. I'll show you some of this. If I go to an easy one, of course, I'm too vain to wear my glasses. So I'm going to be navigating slightly blind. You can see there's a link to the map. And this is good too because it allows me to control the view in which people see maps. TLC gives you a variety of outputs. These are journeys. I wanted to present them as journeys. And so this is the journey view that it brings you up to. I will shut it because I find that if I run too many TLC maps at once, and it's really cool. I mean, TLC is fantastic. I know probably teaching to the converted, you can tip the world, you can focus in, and then you can put some, limited, but some information in each of these points. So for each of these, they link back to the journals that tell you about what people are doing on this expedition and the observations that they're making of the places that they're in. So it's a pretty cool tool. Now I need to find my site again. No. Lucky I made it an easy URL to remember.
Use one of these.
And one of the other things, as I said, TLC lets you put information into each of those pins on the map. TLC lets you put information onto each of those pins in the map, but it's very limited. It's what TLC can cope with. I wanted to put more information about each of these voyages. And so there's also a data set, which, again, not that easy to get to. You have to scroll down when you go to the link. But you can find the, it'll work. Yeah, you can find the, somewhere on, it's now displaying, presumably, my data set. No, not that one.
I think we had a question from up on the side here.
Yep. Okay, so TLC, I think they chose the acronym to hint at something else, but it means time-layered cultural map. And it is a way of mapping that allows you to have a time component. So you're not just sticking things on the map, I can track those journeys. And I'll show you with the next project another way of looking at that time component. So it's fantastic in that it's got that base of Google Earth. You could see with that map as I was showing you that you can tip things around, you can zoom in very closely, you can zoom out, which is amazing with the voyages, because you can see generally you have a map of the one voyage around the globe, but it's a bit vague, as I've discovered when mapping them. It's a bit vague about where exactly they are at any of these points. Here, I can put a pin to the latitude, longitude has 4 decimal places. From the journals, you can tell almost that exactly where they are. So you can zoom out to the big global view of where did they go across the world, and then you can zoom into which bay were they anchored in, where exactly were these observations being made. So it's a fantastic tool in terms of making digital maps and what digital maps can do. I think I'm going to give up on trying to get to the data sets, which is unfortunate. Oh, maybe if I go down a bit further. Those are related publications. You can't see anything that I'm doing obviously wrong, can you? Yeah, here I've tried clicking on this though.
We had some...
Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah, it's downloaded.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was me being incompetent, never mind. So here I've been able to put in extra information. I've got sheets which the TLC runs off for each of the ships and what they were doing at any point. But because we're interested in expeditions, we were interested in what they were picking up along the way. The coral taxonomists wanted to know where coral species defining coral samples were collected. I felt that the size of the ship, how much they could carry on those ships, was important. And I've also put down the published scientific papers from each of the voyages. So there's a lot more information I wanted to attach. Because I'm running not just the map, but also the data set, I've made that information available to other researchers. And with the map, on the map itself, the points take you to the journal about the voyage, but the multi-layer, which I'll talk about in a moment, the multi-layer will take you to the data set, because I think that is important for people to be able to talk to. I'll come back, oh no, I think at this point I will talk about one of the frustrations of dealing with TLC. It's not the easiest system to deal with. You do need some patience. And in terms of stability, if you've made a mistake on a map, often you're better to trash the entire map and start again. Go back to your spreadsheet behind it, work on your data there, then do the convert to the CSV spreadsheet, which I'll show you in a moment, and re-upload it as a whole new map. It has a new URL at that point. If you want stability, you can create what's called in TLC a multi-layer, and even if a multi-layer has only one layer in it, the multi-layer remains stable. You can trash the single layer, reload it when you've got better data to put up, but keep that URL stable, for them, well, as stable as TLC allows you to keep it stable. Right. And I was going to say too, one of the things that really struck me with expeditions to the Pacific, I put up a list of expeditions which fell into the category of scientific expeditions for me. They have to come back before 1834, and thank heavens they do, because there's an awful lot of them when you go looking. And that's one of the things that's new about this project as well, that we're putting all these onto a map, that we're not dividing up by empire, that we're not losing any of these scientific expeditions, ones that qualify. You can see that my progress, it's not complete yet. I'm getting there, but digital projects, they may look flash and new and easy at the upper level, they take a long time to produce. And that would be one of my warnings with this. But at that point, I'd like to talk about our newer project. And this list is relevant as well, because I said I needed criteria to establish which voyages I was interested in. Establishing criteria when you're creating a humanities data set is actually really important. Ana and I are now talking about monuments, but as we started that project, I realised that for me, I can't find a clear criterion that distinguishes monuments from big things. And so we've had to map big things as well, and that's the data set that I'm working in, and that I want to show you in action. So establishing criteria, and I think we need to publish about how we can't distinguish what we think of as traditional monuments from the big things category. So criteria and working through these things, even before you start working on your data sets, can be quite important. And you remember that nice polished Palmer-Pendleton data set that I showed you. This is what they looked like earlier in the process, and I thought I'd kind of draw back the veil. I'm complaining a little bit about TLC and using that website and that tool. I'll complain too about how much effort it takes to create the kind of spreadsheet that will drive it effectively. So this is my draft list of big things. I've pulled it from Wikipedia. There is a nice Wikipedia list of big things. There are other lists, there are other maps of big things. There are problems with them though. I decided this was a decent starting point. I looked to see if I could use an existing map of big things, and I realized there were problems. There were problems bringing the data off. It wasn't easy to get the longitude and latitude from them. And I realized too that even just eyeballing them, I could see Australian big things that were located in Europe, or Australian big things that are located in Japan, which is quite often, it happens to me too. It just means I've missed out a negative on the latitude. So I pulled things, and here I've massaged this a bit. I've added in some extra categories which TLC doesn't allow. So if I come up to the top, these are the categories allowed by TLC. Title, latitude, longitude, data, date end, start date end, place name, description, link back. Only one link back. Because I'm a historian, I like references. If I picked up important information about these big things from another site, I want to remember that. So I've created another column where I'm putting in all the other places I'm looking for information. And because people seem to care what state they're located in, I've also put a column for state. So that's bit looking okay. You can see I've been adding references. And I might mention this too. When I started this, I thought that in terms of where things were located, I was just going to have to put a fairly rough estimate based on the name of the suburb or the place that it was located in. When I started going to Google Earth, I discovered that many of these big things are visible from space. You know, satellite cameras have improved. That's not actually that big a statement. What's even more interesting is if I can get a sense of where it is from space, I can go down to Street View and I can look at these things in their context and pick up what I think about them myself. What kind of big thing are they? Are they at a commercial site? Are they at a tourism site? Are they just somebody's folly? And that's interesting too, the way digital tools, if you've got flexibility in your approach, digital tools will feed into each other. So that's quite fun. It's one of the fun bits of it. But I'll bring you further down the list to where I haven't reached yet in terms of massaging the data. And the Wikipedia columns don't quite match mine. They miss often data about starting points, starting dates, which I'm filling in or I'm estimating. If it's an estimated day of the year, I put estimated date. If it's early 1960s, I'll put 1st of January 1962 and note that I'm estimating the year. So you need to work out how you're managing your data and how you can conform to the categories that TLC requires. And you do need to conform. TLC is not going to conform to you. I started work, here's the New South Wales section. You can see not everything has the necessary information, although I've cut out the excess columns by this point. And so I sorted by start date and got rid of the ones that aren't going to work for TLC. I've got a limited data set here. I'm showing you a draft. And at this point, I would like to show you the draft. I go to, possibly if I put my glasses back on. So if we go to, I had wanted to show you again the live website of the new project, but unfortunately UQ is blocking me because it's a bit too much of a new project. I've logged in as me, and I can have a look at my multi-layers. So I'll show you some of this new stuff. TLC again, it's a back end. It's not all that easy even to navigate. But if we look to the big things in Australia, I've done a couple of test runs. And again, viewing map, there are different ways you can view it, but we'll go to a different view this time. We'll look at timeline. And here you can see there's a timeline along the bottom. I've only managed to get through data for the Northern Territory, and I lost about half of them when I had to have precise dates, Queensland and New South Wales, and Tasmania. Seem to have something in Victoria, which means I probably got it in the wrong spot and I'll need to check it. Anyway, so here it all is, again, material in there. But what's cool about timeline is I can say, I want to know everything that existed in 1972. And so we're going to be able to see with this map the emergence of the big things. As I move that ruler forward, you can see them starting to pop up into existence. You can see where they're emerging across Australia, which I think is pretty cool. The timeline did have an issue for me in that I found I couldn't just see what was in existence between 1994. It's only showing me what pops into being between 1994 and 2022. But knowing that, and knowing that I can't see what gets decommissioned, it's still interesting to see what is popping into existence. And with the data sets that come behind this, I can sort them by date end, and we can pick up when things got decommissioned. Okay. If you go to multi-layers, you can see everybody's, which gets a bit confusing. I'll go to my multi-layers again. So I mentioned that we were interested as well. I'm interested in big things in Australia by type, but I'll show you big things in statues. And we'll view it this time as a cluster view. This shows you concentrations of big things, and I'll show you something else nifty that TLC does. So one of the things that I suspected as we set off on this was that big things tended to be regional and statues tend to be metropolitan. Here, I can turn off the statues and I can see whether that's correct. So I can see them coming, popping up. If we go down to Sydney, for example, you can see that the urban area really only has monuments of the more traditional type. It doesn't have big things, and you can see that very clearly. And as you leave the cities, monuments still exist, but they're rarer. So if I zoom in on Richmond, and you see I can zoom in and I can find exactly where these things are located. If I zoom in, I can see that Richmond has exactly one statue and one big thing. The big thing, see I'm clicking on the site, is the big Kronosaurus. The statue is a colonial soldier. You know, I think I'm going to back the Kronosaurus in Richmond. Now, how are we going for time? Because I thought I might wrestle with the attempt to upload to TLC and show you what that looks like. and the process involved, but I might just mention here these layers. You can see I'm using multi-layers. I'm using them, or we're using multi-layers. We're using them as a way to start that analysis. So I've got various layers set up that I'd like to see. I'd like to compare big things by type. Obviously, there are a whole lot of foodstuffs. Then there are some animals, like dinosaurs, seem to be quite popular. And how does that compare in contrast to people? And then with the statues, we wanted to explore whether there are, in fact, more statues of birds than there are of women. If we type more traditional monuments by whether they're animal, by their people, by their gender, does that actually hold true? So we're looking at crunching the data and finding out about those things. So I'll look around and see if there's anything that people want to ask me at this point. Yep.
Is it only point data that you can upload to the TLC maps, or can you do line and polygon data as well?
I think there are some other things like you can do areas. I haven't explored that because it's not that useful to me. And you could see with the journey example from the expeditions that it's straight lines between the points. That's all it will do for me. It doesn't allow me to avoid trundling the ships over land if I've only got a point here and a point here. And obviously they would have stuck to the water, well, you hope they'd have stuck to the water. So there might be some other facility within it. I didn't design it, I've worked out what it can do for me. And that perhaps might be a point to go to our other map slide and point out that TLC might not always be the answer. So TLC is great. I'm really impressed in how it's going to help us with our analysis once I've got the data sets sorted out, but it will help us with our analysis of these projects. But sometimes other mapping systems are better. Here's a map that we produced for an article that we were writing. And it's a map drawing data from the TLC data set for Captain Cook's voyages, the 3 of them that came into our region, and from Monument Australia for where monuments referencing Cook are located. And we knew what it was going to show, but it's very nice to see it on a map. You can see there are a whole lot more Cook monuments than there are Cook anchorages. So this was a great tool. My maps are so much easier to use than TLC Map. We could produce this map very quickly, and you can see that Australians really are crazy about Cook. Were you saying there was another question?
No, just 10 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Yes. There's very little in here. So because I'm taking the anchorages from the journals, that's what the link back is to. I haven't started, the point of this was analysis of the present and of how people in Australia think about monuments, about Cook. And the point of this map is Australians really hung up on Cook. You can see there are a whole lot more Cook landing sites in New Zealand. He went back on all 3 of his voyages. Australia, he's once. He scuttled up that east coast as fast as he could and passed by Tasmania on his 3rd voyage. The point of the map is the present and how Australians commemorate. So there's a whole lot of really good scholarship and continuing scholarship about the shore and the view. This is a broad overview. This map's about the present, not about what actually happened on those voyages. And the expeditions to the Pacific as a whole, the contribution it's making is the big picture. How many people came through? Where could you go looking? Not just the obvious journals, but are there other scientific expeditions that come through these regions that you can mine for information about the places? So no, unfortunately, no links here to that excellent scholarship that's being done, and that's been done in New Zealand and throughout the Pacific as well. But I think it still has use. Yes, but that's what I'm using. So I've got a Western time capsule, and Since the 1960s, anthropologists have been doing excellent work with these Western time capsules, saying, yeah, the Europeans were crazy, but when they report stuff, they're not seeing what they think they're seeing. We can start to pick up. Now we know more, or we're from these societies that they're reporting on, we can start to pick up what the people on the shore were seeing when they saw the explorers, how the explorers were offending them, because often they were offensive in the things they did. The time capsules are still valuable. Yeah, they're very limited insights into the places, but they're still these remarkable time capsules. And they have images too of things like the ships. You know, the reconstructed voyaging depends on these images of the canoes throughout the Pacific. They're still really useful time capsules.
Robert here. I was thinking about when you're talking in the previous example about, you know, big things being generally situated in regional areas and your monuments being more closely located to metropolitan areas, of which Sydney Hyde Park has like all of them in there. But I was thinking, and I think it was just Queensland and New South Wales, there wasn't much in Victoria, but I just wondered...
I haven't done Victoria yet.
I wondered if this might be an outlier or what commentary you might make on it if you get there. But the classification of like Ballarat being about an hour and a half drive away from Melbourne, if that's regional, considered regional, and they have, and the recent, you know, heard in the news, that whole park where they have all their monuments, the beheadings of those. I wonder how that might sit within that. It would be interesting to see someone do a bit of work on that and make that comment back to that link.
So with this, we're keeping track of vandalism of the monuments as far as it's coming through Monument Australia, and it's something we'll dig into. It'll be interesting, you know, as you say, there's that attack on the Prime Minister's busts in Ballarat, to see whether there are particular locations that attract dispute about these statues. The regional metropolitan thing, statues are scattered across. It's the big things that seem to be almost exclusively regional. So that's an interesting observation, and it's something we do need to dig into.
Yeah, no, thank you, that answers that.
So as we're kind of coming to the end of the presentation, I think from the digital side of things, the kind of big takeaway that we'd like to convey is that major projects using TLC maps are in fact major projects. They have kind of huge spreadsheets that go behind them, and even though TLC Maps is kind of pitched at the level of a new person coming to digital humanities, they do still require a fair bit of digital capability to be able to troubleshoot along the way. And Claire's done a huge amount of work to bring all of these major spreadsheets together in the kind of visualizations that we saw today, which were only really a very brief snapshot. So we do want to kind of feature the pros and cons of TLC maps, and that it has huge capabilities, but it's also a very large undertaking. And so if you're thinking of using TLC maps for your own project, it's kind of just best to be aware that it could be a large undertaking that you're signing up for, and that you kind of have ongoing data management issues that you might have to contend with. But I think also something that we'd like to highlight is the cascading nature of the projects. We've kind of touched on 3 projects today, all of which are kind of using the similar data and that have cascaded from one another, and that this data is available via TLC for other researchers to use. And so we're kind of like very much operating in that commons sense that this humanities data can be generative and can lead to new insights that we can all benefit from. And as Claire's also kind of suggested, the Mapping Monuments project is in its infancy. It's quite iterative, and so we welcome feedback, we welcome contributions, and we're still continuing to work on it ourselves. So yeah, we've kind of mentioned that there's spin-offs available. We'll be particularly interested in looking at the mapping monument from the perspectives of colonial history, race, gender, and other elements such as flora and fauna that Claire mentioned. And just as we're coming to the close, we do have a slide with some recommended readings that have kind of inspired the project, and that also kind of give that bit of background about TLC Map itself. So we might leave it there unless anyone has any... Oh, one final question.
Oh, two maybe.
Thank you for the presentation as you're wrapping up. I was just wondering throughout the presentation, I've used Google Earth Pro before as a part of the Indigenous mapping workshops, which were really fantastic, and was kind of wondering with TLC if there's benefits over Google Earth Pro in terms of like how robust then your data sets are being stored in spreadsheets and things like that. Just because I personally, I haven't used TLC, but I know that Google Earth Pro is quite user friendly to an extent, and there's like a lot of things that you can do with that, including mapping polygons and curved lines, and there are some really fantastic things. It sounds like a plug, I don't work for Google, but there are some really fantastic things that you can do in terms of like making visualised journeys over landscapes and things like that, and within the context of the Indigenous mapping workshop that I did, looking at storytelling and things like that across particularly, obviously, Indigenous Australian landscapes. I was wondering if there was a reason why TLC was and
Our
is
system of
used,
choice?
as opposed to other methods, including
So why
something
did
like
we
that.
choose TLC? And part, I like the time element of it, and it also has promises about making data accessible to other people. So it's easy to download the smaller spreadsheet that's behind the particular TLC map. So I've got those bigger data sets, more information, which I think is important, but that simple list under their headings, very easy for anybody else to take off the site. You can download it, and also you can play with the maps on their site and make them do what you want them to do. So it's that sharing element of TLC Map which has appealed to us with these projects.
Yeah,
And maybe I should investigate Google Earth Pro a bit more, but it's that matter of choosing a tool you're comfortable with, and that will do what you want it to do for the particular project. This, I was reasonably comfortable, and it did what I wanted to do with those voyages.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. I was just going to say that Google Earth Pro does also have a really interesting timeline feature, and when you can layer over images of historical maps over the landscape really well, and that's really interesting if you pull them from Trove. If you're looking at place names and things like that, and putting those historical maps over, and you can slide through a timeline and view the different maps in their different iterations and name changes. But anyway, it's an interesting...
Thank you. I may take some of my data sets and go and have a play.
Have a play.
I was just wondering, it was just a thought. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was one other question, I think. Same question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's us. Thank you very much.
One more. Yeah.
One more question here. Is this on? Can you hear me? Thank you for this. I actually work on a slightly similar project, which is about storytelling and the relationship to land, but actually in the Mediterranean. So I was really interested in what you were doing here. Two kind of questions about how you visualise or project a kind of a sense of the landscape. You both pointed out how wonderful it is to be able to use something like Google Maps to get really good accuracy about the placement of locations. But so much of our historical data is not, I mean, we're often giving the wrong impression if we're saying we can be that accurate. How does TLC deal with sort of fuzziness around placement of locations?
It doesn't, well, I've chosen to communicate in the format that TLC finds acceptable. I've changed myself to fit the TLC mould, but in the description I have noted whether I'm unsure about the date, whether I'm unsure about the exact location. I've also published just now that Land and Sea, which is about the problems of using the data from the journals. They don't exactly know where they are. Longitude is a problem which is not solved really until the 1960s, and satellites. The continents were still a bit vague in their placement until satellites. The names too that they use for places have changed, but names are the best way for me to get back. And when I look at the journals and I look at their little maps of the coastline, there is amazing ability to be accurate, but yes, there's fuzziness as well, and there's room to put that in the words around, but the computer still needs what the computer needs. And that's one of the things that, it's one of the compromises that we have to find our way through. How do we do what the computer needs us to do while still retaining that sense of the uncertainties that lie in our data? There's no easy answer. I think I've come to my peace with the computer. Other people will find possibly better solutions. Oh, are we still one last question?
Not really a question, just a comment on the fuzziness. So a computer's ability to handle fuzziness is not an absolute thing. I mean, it can't not and it can't handle it. It depends on how it's working, right? So in this case, I would say TLC Map and most software, spatial software, either doesn't handle fuzziness well or does it fairly superficially. So you can take something, you can blur it. What it doesn't let you do is it doesn't let you add a determined amount of fuzziness to something, a mathematically defined amount. And it certainly doesn't usually allow you to do stuff that's actually sufficient for the kind of work that Indigenous communities and others would want with fuzziness. So that is actually a part of the work program of the Indigenous Data Network, is to look at that. We have a candidate data model to look at this, and we have some test demonstration maps coming out soon that will show an area with a determined amount of fuzziness. So you could say something like, there's a cultural artifact or location there. We want to say it's there, but it's precise where it's on that side of the river, so we know that's a boundary, but we don't really know where it goes that way. It's sort of blurry. So that kind of nuanced fuzziness is something that we actually desperately need to represent Indigenous data more fairly and according to the way it's actually perceived. So I think that's a massive area of work that the technicians and so on should be looking at. We are looking at, and I hope we can progress it in this project.
And I know there's some fuzziness inherent in TLC because it came out of that Newcastle massacre map. And again, there are some of those sites which the people involved don't want exactly identified. You don't want tourists coming out and going on massacre tours. So there may well be more fuzziness available in TLC than I'm using, because with my data sets, I'm happy to get a little bit of false precision and make the system work easily for me rather than play with that fuzziness. But in other contexts, it would be worth checking what TLC is able to do or finding other solutions. Yeah, fuzziness and humanities data to computers, it's a big issue.
So to sum all that up, as TLC continues to evolve and improve, particularly in the Indigenous space in around the cultural sensitivities and so forth, it will require a little bit of cultural TLC in the journey. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.